all of my viewpoints, which I took for granted as being true, are just opinions. An opinion is not true. It cannot be true. It's true only for the person who holds it. And therefore, you can change it. It can change. You can have a different point of view. That was like a miraculous moment to me because I was going around through life assuming that the way I felt about all of my experiences was truth. And when I realized, no, it's not, it's an opinion and I can change my opinion. Paige Dorian Productions, welcome back to the American Glutton Podcast. How are you, Paige?
Doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm all good. What are we talking about today?
Well, here's a question for you. Knowing that, everything you've shared on this podcast over the years about your own, diets, everything you've done, maintenance now, the success you've had, et cetera. Here's my question for you. I want to know about your perspective, how has your perspective on diet changed from the beginning to now? Meaning, when you first tried dieting, maybe you weren't successful and then you had success, but you gained your weight back, and now you're mostly maintaining. So what is your overall perspective on diet these days?
Yeah. Okay, great. Great question. My perspective has changed so radically that if I go back to, if I go all the way back to childhood, it was diets were being done to me as a punishment, right? As a little kid. And I think about this a lot. Like, I'm beyond sure my mom sat me down at some point and said, like, here's what food is and here's what it does. I have no memory of that. I have no analytical memory of that happening, but I just know my mom's like a really good person and I'm sure she did that time and again, but that escapes me. Diet to me largely was a punishment for my body being wrong. And if I go to like around 10 years old, I definitely was experiencing shame about my body and could tell that my body was very different than the other boys and girls. But at 5 years old, I had none of that. It was just like, something's wrong with me. I was not aware of it. I can't even say I was really even aware of my body in some kind of separate way from me, like it's weird. Like I think about my body as this machine that I'm moving around, and often we're in contradiction with one another with what we want. My body will send an urge to whatever processing unit I am, and suddenly I'm like, no, get that thought out of your head. That's not what we're doing. That's not part of the game plan. And so I feel like there's a struggle there. At 5 years old, I existed with I didn't think about my body. There was no realization of this thing is something I have any power over. And I didn't have any power at the time. And so this was a punishment. And I didn't understand at the time that I was overweight. Like there was no sitting down with me to go like, hey, when you stand on that little box on the floor, it's spitting out a number. And the doctor says that number's too high. None of that happened. It was just, you're fat, you can't eat. Like, we're going to now serve you food. You have no control of it. You don't get seconds, and just suck it up. And this is what it's going to be. And then that turned into a lot of weird diets through my childhood. So like coming out of that, when I had some autonomy, I also wasn't thinking about it actively, but I had like a deep sense of shame and guilt about my body. And I was like very hesitant to ever eat in front of people because eating was a shameful thing. And I basically just did whatever I wanted. I succumbed to all the base urges that were sent to me. If a thought occurred to me, there wasn't like battling that thought. If it occurred to me that I would feel better if I did drugs, I would go and do drugs. If it occurred to me that I'd feel better if I, went and got 3 superstars with cheese and a large fries and a milkshake, that's what I would do because it was comforting. So my first kind of attempt to diet as an adult, where I got sober and I decided that I wanted to diet and lose weight and change my body and have a completely different life. Um, I was completely like, there were a lot of ideas in my head about food that were kind of leftovers or holdovers from my mother's weird ideas about food, but I didn't know what I was doing. And my first kind of run in with dieting was, to some degree, like just go on super low calories and lose a bunch of weight, but then you can't do that forever. So when you're going to actively start to think about food, it was the first as an adult diet that was presented to me by a nutritionist was eat right for your blood type. And so I started to have these ideas that the food was the problem. It was just the wrong foods that I was eating. And that resonated greatly because as a kid, my mom would often go through these, long, arduous bouts with like, oh my God, nightshades. It turns out nightshades are really bad for you. So we're not going to be eating tomatoes and eggplants and mushrooms, I think. And there's probably other ones that I'm forgetting, but like those are causing this problem. And as a kid, it's all filtered through, I'm picking up tiny little fractions of it. But when it came to being an adult and going like, I need to figure this out, I want to change, eat right for your blood type had this resonance of the food is the problem. And so that was what started me on my path. And then I clung to, over the years, anything that was harmonious with that idea. The food is the problem. So it was gluten is the problem, and then I'll just not eat anything with gluten, or sugar is the problem and I got to get rid of sugar. And then when that's not getting me to where I want to go, there was also this strong desire for a finish line, this idea that like the number of pounds, and I was kind of so obese that I didn't have, like, I couldn't set an actual finish line. It wasn't like I started dieting and went, when I get to 185, I'm done. That seemed so far away that I wasn't even doing that. But I knew, almost without thinking it through, that there was a finish line, that there was going to be a certain number of pounds lost, that once I arrived there, it would be like, Siddhartha sitting under the Bodhi tree for 49 days and achieving enlightenment, right? Like that was really how I was thinking of it. If I can harm myself well or go through this punishment of my flesh, I will achieve enlightenment. And like, listen, sitting under a tree for 49 days sounds absolutely fucking awful. So I'm literally, without being overly analytical, grasping to these kind of concepts and plugging them together. And my perspective was, there's something out there that is in the food that's harming me. And if I can do without it, if I can exist without it long enough, I'll achieve this state and I'll be cured. I really thought of it like that. Like I have this sickness and weight loss will cure me. And man, I just was that was the cycle. When they talk about yo-yo dieting, that was the cycle, because a lot of those diets would produce weight loss, but they wouldn't ever, none of them got me anywhere near what I imagined was a finish line. And so when they'd stall out and motivation the only motivation to do it was that I was losing weight. And as soon as I wasn't losing weight, it became a real grind. If I would get on the scale and see a pound down every day or even 3 pounds a week, I was great. When that stopped for a prolonged period of time, then the motivation to keep eating that way was gone, because that was the only reason I was doing it, you know? And like, the difference between then and now is I don't think of any of those things as the problem. Like, the problem does not exist outside of me at all. The problem is entirely me and within me, and how I interact with the external. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so my perspective has greatly shifted. Now, I read a lot of philosophy. I got really into the Stoics. I'm sure every bit of that played a part, but really, this kind of search for a finish line, when I got rid of that as an ideal, when I realized that there was not going to be any enlightenment through weight loss, that there was no solving me in that manner, it kind of was like a huge relief. Like, well, I don't have to do any of this stuff anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a completely different problem than the way I perceived it 20 years ago. What, more than 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. I started dieting in 2002, and I can remember the very first day. Brandy, I was in Romania. I was on the phone with Brandy, and I was like, it was the weirdest thing. And I've talked about it before, but I felt like I was telling her a secret. It was the most vulnerable I've ever been, because I felt very much like, if I tell her this secret, that's so odd, because it's like the most objective thing ever. I am gigantic. If I tell her that I'm aware of it and I need to change, then she would become aware of it, almost like she couldn't see it, and the only way she could see it is if I told her about it. That would then, why would she want to be with me if she became aware of it? And that would ruin the relationship. But I also knew at the same time that if I don't handle it, if I don't solve it, if I don't start working on it, then I also lose her, because her life was about, going to the beach and hikes and museums and walking around, and it was really an active life. And I could only keep begging off those things for so long before it was like, hey, you don't want to do anything, and you don't even really eat around me, and still you're so, like, it just would have, like, the whole charade and facade of my life would have fallen apart. And so her first thing to a guy who's thousands and thousands of miles away, who's like, I was distraught and going like, I need to change. I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. Tell me what to do. She suggested, okay, don't eat bread. And I clung to that. I was like, oh my God, bread is the problem. And really the lesson there was, you can be responsible. You can have power. You can exert control. You know what I mean? Like, in this chaos, you can decide to put up a boundary and stick to it. That's the whole lesson she taught me. It took me like 20 years to figure that lesson out. But what I took away from it is bread is poison, right? I don't think I ate bread for a decade after that. And when I did, it was like, fuck, am I cheating on Brandy? I got to tell her I'm going to eat this piece of bread. And Brandy, I'm going to eat this piece of bread. And she'd go, great. I hope it's great. Enjoy the bread. You know what I mean? Like, but I was existing in this universe where bread was poison, because that was like step one for me. But the real lesson was, I have some control. And so when I think about it in those two ways, it's really a powerfully different perspective. Like, thank God she gave me something to do in that moment. And I wish I could have learned in that moment just that I had power, and that I was learning to be in control and responsible. But it took me a long time. I kept looking for the bread, the nightshades, the lectins, the carbohydrates, the external thing that I could then go, well, it's just simple. It's just this one thing that if I don't participate in consuming that, I'm solved. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's way more complicated than that, but also actually much more simple because, like, none of that stuff is poison. The poison is in the quantities that I was consuming it.
Right. And I mean, first of all, the bread resonates because we all have had every diet where you don't eat bread, stay off carbs, I still to this day, and I'm in such a better place with diet, I still have a funny feeling when I eat bread. You've made me a sandwich at your house that's on maybe low calorie bread, the most balanced thing. I still yesterday had toast with my eggs and felt weird.
Yeah.
So it is these, yeah. So you talking about dieting starting, so long ago, and it was the food is the problem. So it's the nightshades, or it's the bread, or I'm allergic to this, or the sugar, or like keto says you do that. It's very hard, don't you think, though, to break that? How did you break that? Because yes, you just said you realize it's much more complicated yet so simple. And when you decided it wasn't the food, but like, how did you do that? Because we are inundated with people out there giving us different programs. And I'm not saying any of that is bad, because some people do well doing that. Like, I don't eat this and I feel better, or whatever. Or those diets, those ways of eating even help people to stay on whatever path, like if I just eat whatever the heck I want, and I'd have a hard time, no matter what the quantities are, I have a hard time sticking to my plan of, long term. Right. So how did you do that?
Well, I did 15 plus years of wanting to get to a point where I had, if I think about it in like material results, I wanted to have the ability to walk with my family all day, but yeah, I say that. And even today, we'll go to New York where you walk, 15 to 20,000 steps a day. And even then I'm like, Jesus Christ, my feet hurt, my lower back hurts. And I'm like, this is just, maybe my lot in life is suffering in this way. But I will tell you that I can do 20,000 steps and go to sleep with sore feet and wake up and do it again the next day.
Yeah.
I could not have done that at 450 or 500 pounds. Just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that. I couldn't have gotten on a plane and sat in a coach seat and buckled the seatbelt. I couldn't have sat in a coach seat, number one. And I couldn't have even buckled a seatbelt in first class. I couldn't walk into a store in Soho in Manhattan and bought clothes. I can do that now. These are huge victories for me that I never experienced as a kid. I went to the big and tall man shop.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as an aside, I remember there were two big and tall man shops in Los Angeles that I was aware of. There was one on Santa Monica and Fairfax, and one in Beverly Hills called Rochester. And the one on Santa Monica and Fairfax was just the big and tall man shop. And it was like more for our budget. If I had to go and get a suit for a wedding, which I never really did, I knew there was a Rochester where you went and got fancy pants clothes, like polo shirts and stuff. Big and tall man shop had Dickies and t-shirts, which is what I wore as a kid. But also they had a bunch of nudie mags in the bathroom. which discovering that at 10 years old was like miraculous. And I then wound up always having to use the bathroom when we went to the big and tall man shop.
Yeah.
As a 10-year-old boy will. But yeah. How do you do it? I never, there was none of those things ever presented themselves. So like, I'm I'm sure a morbidly obese person could stop eating sugar and lose weight. That's perfectly reasonable.
Mhm.
Stop drinking your calories and you're going to lose weight. But is that going to get you like when you have I had these broad concepts, not they weren't very specific. They were just broad. I wanted to be a normal person. And to be honest with you, I'm as far as like the BMI scale goes, I'm heavy, I'm overweight now. So like I'm not even normal. You know what I mean? Like when I go to the doctor and I get all my tests done and I get my body fat scan checked, he says like, you're very healthy. It's okay. You got a bunch of extra muscle mass. Don't worry about it. But like, I'm still not quote unquote normal, but who's normal now? Normal, maybe if we're just going by averages, the average is overweight. So like, what does normal even fucking mean today? You know what I mean? But when I was 25 years old and just desperate to be normal, um, I, not eating sugar never got me anywhere near that. I would lose some weight and then I would stop losing weight and I'd have lost some weight, but like I'm still I'm still obese. Um, and keto, same thing. And Atkins and paleo and Whole30 and pick your poison, eat right for your blood type. Yeah, I'd lose a little weight, but then I'd stop losing weight because I'm still overeating all the fucking food on the list that they say you can eat. Eat as
Mhm.
much of this stuff as you want, and you just get rid of these foods. And whenever I did that, it never got me anywhere near a coach seat on an airplane. And look, that's not a great goal. I would much prefer to always sit in first class, but I've gone coach and been perfectly fine at the
Yeah.
size I'm at, which I just couldn't physically fit in the seat before. It was like not possible. I remember having to take JetBlue before there was JetBlue Mint for whatever reason. It was like a timing thing. There was one flight to New York, and I had to get on this flight, and it was JetBlue, and it was in the beginning of JetBlue, and all they had was they were all coach seats,
Mhm.
but they were slightly nicer. This was the first plane I think that had like a TV screen in the back of every headrest. I
Mhm.
had to buy two seats. And then when I realized, like, oh, I can just buy two seats, then it opened up the doors to like Southwest. I can ride Southwest because I can buy two seats. And for a number of years to take those flights, I would do that, or I'd wait and pay some astronomical amount to fly first class on another plane. I don't have to do that anymore. If I got to
Yeah.
get on a plane today, it doesn't matter if first class is sold out. It really doesn't matter. I can fit anywhere on the plane. And
Mhm.
that's a miracle. And not eating sugar never got me anywhere near that. It just didn't. And so having the the solution be external to me, it never got me there. And there was reading the Stoics, reading Marcus Aurelius, where he puts everything back onto the individual. Like it's all the entire world and universe and everything exists within our mind. And
Mhm.
it's up to us how we view it and how we interact with it. And that kind of stuff, looking at the world in that way, the realization that all of my viewpoints, which I took for granted as being true, are just opinions.
Mhm.
And an opinion is not true. It cannot be true. It's true only for the person who holds it. And therefore, you can change it. It can change. You can have a different point of view. That was like a miraculous moment to me, because I was going around through life assuming that the way I felt about all of my experiences was truth. And when I realized, no, it's not, it's an opinion and I can change my opinion. When you grow a little bit and you realize, like, when I was a kid, I thought, X was cool I'm not talking about X the band. X the band is still very cool, but like whatever, pick your thing was cool. And now I don't think it's cool anymore. Well, at some point, my opinion on that changed. So I can change. I know I can change my opinion on things. You
Mm.
know, when my mom fed me liver as a little kid, I thought it was gross. I now think it's delicious, and my kids think it's gross. And maybe, you know, one day when I die, they'll go order it at a restaurant and think fondly of me and eat it and go like, this isn't so bad. You know, that's possible. Tastes can change.
Mhm.
Um, we are all allowed to change our mind about anything. And when I realized that, like, all of my thoughts and feelings and experiences, I'm in control of how to think and how to view the world. And I can change my mind about this stuff. And so the external being the causation for my condition, that's just not true for me anymore. What's
Mhm.
true is that it's all on my shoulders and it's about my interaction with this stuff. Now, that said, I can recognize that, you know, there's stuff out there that I have a lot harder time interacting with, and so stuff like that is largely stuff that I avoid or don't interact with. And I think individually, it's good for people to figure out if they have that too and what are those things and put up some guardrails around those things. But like, so fast food is a tough one for me.
Mhm.
I'm never going to be full off a Big Mac, and I know I can overeat that stuff. So that's just stuff I don't tend to eat a lot. But if I came at it from the perspective that that was the problem, and if I just avoid that, there's no problem, I'm spinning my wheels because I'll be interacting with something else in a way that contributes to the condition that
Mm.
I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. So if you what is the how do I phrase this? You know, it's like what you're saying makes so much sense, right? Like, oh, I can be, and maybe that isn't a obvious thought to people because it's not always obvious. You just think like, this is my problem. I have this problem with this thing. I'm overweight. I have no control. Whatnot, right? And so let's say you get to that place where you decide, actually, I can have control and I can be in charge of myself and so on. And you can shift your viewpoint or your perspective. What do you say or suggest as a starting place to then changing the behavior,
Yeah,
because
no, I'll tell you. I know exactly what you're saying. And I'm actually right now today writing something for Substack on this very thing.
mm,
And that is, be careful of your thoughts because your thoughts become your actions. Be careful of your actions because your actions become your habits. Be careful of your habits because your habits create your character, and your character leads to your destiny. So when I go back to me in the life where my thoughts were the accumulation of my past experiences colliding with the present and some like intention towards the future, I have no control. My thoughts just are what they are, and I'm not in control of my thoughts. My thoughts are just happening because of what happened to me yesterday and the day before and my present environment. And that is the magical soup that makes my thoughts. And that is how I existed for a long time. But that's not also not true. Um, if I decide right now to think of a cat, you know I don't love cats. I have no reason to think of a cat right now. The reason I'm thinking of a cat is just to prove to myself that I can create a thought.
yeah.
I can manifest a thought in my head. Now, I can think the thought that Ethan is a super confident guy, right? That doesn't make it true, but I can think that thought. And if I think that thought and force myself to think that thought 10 times a day, which I could do. I might have to write it down. I might have to set, Google alarms to remind me to think that thought. But I am capable of thinking a thought, whether I feel that it resonates with truth or not. And if I keep doing that and keep doing that, and then I start talking about it, about how confident I am, and then I start putting it into action and creating habits around it, and my character changes then I've changed my destiny. So it really does, I believe, boil down to your thoughts. And if you're having a bunch of negative, dumb, pointless, useless thoughts, stop. You stop. You have the power to stop yourself every time you are thinking like, well, if the only reason I can't lose weight is McDonald's or government subsidizing beef and corn, whatever it is, and you've been having this thought and you believe that that's true, fine, but you're not getting where you want to go. Find a thought that is the seed that's going to get you empowered over time, right? And this is stuff like in Substack, I'm saying, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if our thoughts manifested themselves into, reality instantly, right? Like, be careful of your thoughts. And I'm sure if there's a multiverse, there's some planet where that's happening and the laws of physics as we know them don't exist. And that's really wild. But now I think that that's happening, but just slow, like how hair grows. You don't notice it day to day. You notice it in retrospect. I know I need a haircut, and I know I had a haircut a month ago, and today I need a haircut. And I didn't think that I needed one any of the days leading up to today, but today I noticed that my hair is longer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is how that works. It's slow. I think weight loss is slow. You don't notice weight loss on the day to day, but if you have lost 50 pounds over the course of a couple of months and you look at a picture of yourself from a couple of months ago and compare it to, you see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's slow like that, but you got to do this mental work slowly. Find the way you want to exist and start thinking that way and start forcing yourself to think that way and do it whether you believe it or not. And eventually I think if you put it into action and your character changes because of, then it becomes true. You manifest it in that way, and suddenly you have changed the way you live just by thinking it. This sounds real like woo woo and spiritual nonsense, but it's not.
Mm-mm.
If you're looking in the mirror every day and going, I'm a horrible piece of shit who can't do anything, great. Then that's what you're going to be. Keep doing that. But if you look in the mirror every morning and you go, I'm going to beat the day. I'm going to beat myself today. My biggest challenger is myself. And today I'm going to be victorious, and here are all the things I'm going to be victorious in, and lay them out and tell people what you're up against and what you're doing, and talk about it and put it into action. And then your character changes. You have these habits. And so I really do think it's as simple as it starts with how you think.
Yes, I mean, that makes so much sense. And also, like, you can start small, I mean, or you can start slow. You can start with one thing, right, that you want to work on. It doesn't have to be every single thing all at once, but you can start with anything, and you can start literally like right this minute.
Yeah.
And, of all the things we've talked about, all the times we've talked about the body positivity and healthy at every size and all that, there is something to that, right? Of like, it occurs to me now as a person who can very easily I'm either, my whole life it's black and white. I'm fat, I'm not, I'm this, I'm, whatever kind of stuff I've said to myself. And there is that point of like, don't be so mean to yourself, even if your body is bigger in this moment than you want it to be, even if you need to lose weight, you need to get healthier, you need to exercise, you want to, whatever, right? So it's like, there's something to be said for that, of like, that is, at least it's a thought. Do you agree? I guess is a question. At least it's a thought towards, I'm not a piece of shit, because we just keep we have what we say we are. I totally believe that.
Yeah, we do. And I get complimented on my body all the time nowadays. And I don't believe it. I don't. I can sit there, like, I can very easily pick myself apart and not be satisfied or happy. But I can also recognize that that's damaging and go like, I better fucking find something or else I'm going to give up and go back. So what's the point?
Yeah.
I've lost 300 pounds and could very easily be a negative Nancy and go like, I have loose skin, my nipples hang down, I have bad posture, I have flat feet. Like I could get really into all of the things about myself that I don't love and be
Mm-hmm.
super negative. Or I could go, fuck, I worked really hard and I fit in a coach airplane seat and my feet still hurt after I walk around all day, but I could walk around all day. And these are massive, massive victories. And I'm going to celebrate them so that I keep achieving them. Because if it's just look, the reality is my idea in the beginning of I just want to be normal is unobtainable. There is no normal that satisfies me. There is no magical click or skin that I step into or size that I become that suddenly everything's better and I don't have these negative feelings towards myself. So I better start fucking changing the way I feel about myself or be happier. Should I be happier at 550 pounds? Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like I can promise you I was not happier then. And I had a lot more problems. And my health was bad. And I was on death's doorstep and sleep apnea and high blood pressure and cholesterol and liver problems and couldn't fit in a coach airplane seat. Like this is something to be excited about. But it is.
It is, especially if you couldn't before. 100% it is. I know. As a side note, when you talked about the big and tall men's store, it made me think of, my stepmother. My parents were always overweight. My dad and my stepmother were. My mom, not so much. She was like, she was one of those people that couldn't gain weight no matter how much she ate, like the strangest thing in the world. So, of course,
Those
I took after.
bastards.
What a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I took after my dad, and my dad's joke was like, we look the wrong way at a cookie and we gain 3 pounds,
Right.
so I was on that. So my stepmother would take me shopping to what she called the fat lady store. And she was, fat, so she could call herself that. And she would say, let's go to the fat lady store, honey, and see what we can get. And there was one that was called the Forgotten Woman.
Oh, man.
And I think it was in Beverly Hills, actually. And it was like the nicer place to go if we had to get, and I don't think I was at that time. I fit into the smallest size there. She was happy. This is actually just like off topic slightly, just about my stepmother, but she was happy to buy me anything, anytime I wanted when we went to that store.
Right.
Any other like regular store, it was like, oh, we don't have it in the budget. Isn't that kind of funky? Anyway, Olive Sholem, I loved her, but, yeah, there's those stores. But thank God now all these other places carry such a different size range, and it's actually like no one has to feel that way that they're sneaking into this place that only heavy people. Anyway, I digress. But coming back around to perspective, right? And so what would you say then, like, then compared to now in a one, like a one summarizing thing, would you say it was all about these external things were my problem, and now it's that I know I'm not the problem, but that it's up to me? Like how would you pose that?
Yes, the perspective was from external to internal entirely. It was entirely searching for reasons outside of me that
Mm-hmm.
were causing problems in me to how am I creating this situation for myself? It was entirely a shift of perspective from looking out to looking in.
Mm-hmm. And so if a person out there is having this or has had this history of starts and stops or a history of trying to lose weight or, find themselves here in the beginning of the year as we are with this like age old feeling we have of like, it's time to get going. Maybe we missed that first of the year time. Maybe we are off to a slower start than we wanted. Maybe we're like, yeah, we're not like off and running and hitting those goals, or we're not where we thought we were halfway through this month. It's like, or where we'd be. So if we take that perspective change and go, okay, it's up to me, then what's the first step and the second step, and like, how, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, well, I think it becomes a bigger job, because it's like saying, I want to be the CEO of a company.
mhm,
And then it's suddenly like, oh, okay, well, if you just decide that it's up to you to become the CEO of a company, and that's it, and you stop there, and you just go about your day going, I'm going to be the CEO of, I don't think you get anywhere.
right,
It requires real planning, right? And so if it's entirely up to me, and searching for external factors rather than my behavior with external factors, it's a big job. And sorry, that was another thing, was I just want it to be as easy and as simple and as like a one-shot deal. And when it became entirely the burden of me to figure out and do, it's a monumental task to go like, okay, well, it's going to take a lot, and it starts small, and you got to like figure out how all of your actions on the small scale contribute to your larger goal. And like, it's just a big undertaking, which is why I think these diets are so successful. You tell somebody, I got the keys to the magic kingdom, and it's just don't eat refined carbs, or don't eat sugar, or don't eat corn syrup, or don't eat red dye 40. Um, let's all get up in arms and make America healthy again. And if we just stop subsidizing corn, that's all we have to do. And we don't have to think about it. It's like, I don't think that's going to get us anywhere. I'll overeat regular sugar. I'll overeat beet sugar. Hell, if you put monk fruit sugar in something, I'll overeat it. If I decide that my only problem is corn syrup and and I'm not saying like, if those things are harmful, fine, get rid of them. But that's like the tip of the iceberg. That doesn't solve me at all. I mean, that doesn't contribute to solving me in any way, shape, or form,
mhm,
those two things. So, like, what does? I need to be a little bit more active. I need to be way more diligent with not overeating. I need to find foods which satiate me more. I personally need to eat more protein than I had been. There's a lot that goes into it. And then those structures, it's like, okay, I found that structure which works, and I'm not losing weight. Okay, now you need to reduce total intake,
mhm.
right? And then diet breaks, get used to maintaining your weight. If we're thinking about this long term, it's like there's a lot in there that has nothing to do with it being easy or quick, or, looking for this permanent state as though I was going to find it by sitting under a tree, or fasting in my living room, or going on a liquid diet for 60 days. Yeah, I could lose 80 pounds. Those 80 pounds are coming right back if I don't do something else. So
Mhm.
like, everything is a step, and the path is never ending. The finish line is death. And all of that, it's just a lot of work, but it starts for me with looking internally with how I'm behaving, what my compulsions lead me to do, and how I'm in my own way most of the time.
Yeah. The Finish Line is Death would be a great book title.
Yeah.
You can have that.
Yeah, it's super
Um,
cheerful, right? It's really
super,
uplifting.
but it's really interesting actually just to think about that, and it that has actually really, I've never quite heard it put that way. But that is it, meaning there is no big magical moment of where I'm done. There is no I'm done. It's a lifestyle. Not even a lifestyle. It's just a change in your life for the long haul. For
Yeah,
just
and that's really, I mean, that couldn't be further from how I thought about it 20 years ago. 20
yeah.
years ago, it was all temporary. We've talked about acute and chronic,
Hmm.
and that plays into it too. That's part of the perspective shift. That's where I realized, like, oh my God, if this is a chronic condition, then none of these short-term fixes are affecting it at all, right?
Mm.
They might be like handling a symptom. But if I stop doing them and I still have the condition, then the symptom is going to return.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You've given me and many others a lot to think about. I really do appreciate you putting it in this way. And yeah, I'm so curious what I'm going to read that Substack when that comes out. I'm so curious what everybody's going to have to say to this. So let us know your thoughts, everybody out there listening. And thank you, Ethan, for sharing your perspective and it's how it's changed.
Thank you. Thank you, Paige. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.